press play. He's the voice of the intersection of marketing, tech, and popular culture. Thinking is his commodity. DJ, data punk, stylish sock collector, and author of the book Disruptive Marketing. Geoffrey Cologne is your host of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds.
This is episode 43. If it's Friday, it's another episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. I'm your host, Geoffrey Cologne, broadcasting live from the Emerald City of Seattle. This episode, we're going to talk about Dan Lyons' new book, Disrupted, and his year in what he called startup hell. Also, Facebook F8 Developers Conference. What was talked about and how was it talked about? Plus, sustainability as the new growth hacking. Is it possible that growth hacking might take a back seat to sustainability hacking in the world of marketing? Or is it just another buzzword for us to dissect, dilute, and toss in the waste bin? All that and more on this week's episode of Disruptive FM. You can follow us on Twitter at Disruptive FM, and of course in our Read Write Remix world, you can participate in the conversation using hashtag Disruptive FM, wherever hashtags are supported. So this is episode 43, and wow, the episodes just keep coming and coming and coming, and I like to record them live every Friday and then post them the same day so that you can get the episodes and listen to them. A couple weeks ago, I was in Pennsylvania and broadcast live from there. And then last week, I was in Vancouver, and I actually did not get to post that, so you can actually listen to episode 42, which happens to also be posted at the same time 43 is posted. And I'm back in the Emerald City, but next Friday I will be in Orlando, Florida for Digital Now, and I'll be speaking there, so we'll definitely be recording from there as well. And I'm going to see who is there that I can sit down and interview, which will be nice to have sort of a discussion again. We haven't had interviews for a couple of episodes, and we're trying to get those back on the slate again, so I might be able to squeeze some in while I'm in Orlando. And again, a lot of places this year I'll be speaking in 2016. If you want to know where I'm speaking, check out all the dates on my website at geoffreycolone.net/speaking. That's geoffreycolon.net/speaking. As noted, end of April, Orlando, Florida. And the beginning of May, I'll be in Hamburg, Germany for the M2C conference. Back in Seattle for a Chief Marketing Officer Summit. I'm in New York twice in June. One of those dates is in Brooklyn. I'm in Denver, Colorado, Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Las Vegas for PubCon, Detroit, Michigan. Yeah, a lot of places. I was actually asked to come and speak in Australia, but it conflicts with a date I have on the East Coast. So it'll be interesting after the book comes out. I should say after my book comes out in August. And shameless plug, title, Disruptive Marketing, What Growth Hackers, Data Punks, and Other Hybrid Thinkers Can Teach Us About Navigating the New Normal. I think once that's out, it might become ridiculously silly in terms of the amount of people that ask me to speak at different conferences. And I think 2017 might even be more insane. But let's stay connected and keep the discussions going. And of course, no matter how busy it gets on the conference front, I will definitely be producing the podcast. I think it's one of my favorite things I love to do, and I look forward to it on a weekly basis. And hopefully you enjoy it as well. And you are subscribing to it either on iTunes, listening to it on Spreaker, SoundCloud, or, of course, YouTube. If you like to listen to audio on a video network, you have that choice to do so. So Dan Lyons was a reporter for many years at Newsweek. Like all of us, he had to face an abrupt change in his professional life and was sort of caught at a crossroads a couple of years ago. He no longer had a gig at Newsweek and was looking around for his next opportunity and decided to go work for HubSpot up in Boston, Massachusetts. And his new book, entitled Disruptive, really gives a sort of interesting look into the world of startup hell, which is unfortunately caught too many of us by surprise, I think, in the world of technology. I think many of us think that every company is going to be successful. Every company is going to end up like a Facebook or a Google, or ultimately have valuations like Microsoft or Apple. And we know now that that's just definitely not the case. Or we could end up at a company where there is still no profit but major growth, like Amazon. Or there's no profit and major growth and a B corporation, like Etsy. Again, there's nothing wrong with any of these models. You know, that's not my editorial diatribe when it comes to this particular topic. I think what resonated with me, and I've only been able to read excerpts of the book, not the whole entire book just yet. I'm in the process of doing so, but excerpts of the book, what I really enjoyed about it is Dan has a great background as a reporter and a writer, and he ultimately wanted to do content for a tech company. And he got caught working with a lot of what I guess you could say are non-visionary types. And we find this quite a bit in the marketing world. You know, the people who basically have no creative bones in their body and somehow end up at the top of running departments. In fact, there's a great excerpt in the book that if you only read one excerpt, it's one that Dan talks about how you have these, you have a company culture that basically has a person that starts from scratch there. They fail their way upwards. They're C players, and they end up running departments at the company. And then, of course, they have big egos, and they can't stand being wrong. The people they hire are all D players. The interesting thing about this is, and why it really resonated with me, personally, I've been at companies like this before in the past, which is just awful. It's like you can't get out of there fast enough. And of course, you make the wrong decision because you're sold a bill of goods that isn't necessarily the truth. And you're young and you're naive and you're sort of stupid and you don't really know how to navigate things. Not to say that you don't make those mistakes later in life, but I think once people sort of see how it is, they realize, wait, I'm not gonna take this opportunity. That's not the right opportunity for me. But I think what the interesting thing is, in my upcoming book, I talk a lot about how if you are hiring people, you should really not hire anyone like you at all. You should hire people who are radically different from you, because that's what a design thinking group brings to the table, is better ideas. So in some respects, I've messaged Dan and I'm like, hey, I have this book coming out that you're probably going to hate based on the title. You're going to at least cringe because you're going to think, oh my gosh, it's this guy who's an inbound marketer who is going to talk about data and all the things that make the world of marketing wrong, or at least not a fun place to be in. And what I sort of noted to him is, I said, hey, the title might make you cringe, but the topics in it really should really resonate with you, because it's the opposite of what you described at HubSpot. It really is, to truly be disruptive means that you are actually doing things that are counter to how people have taught them to you. So when I hear stories of Dan was noting in the book how people were just sort of taking directions and not really thinking outside the box creatively. That's not disruptive whatsoever. You're basically just taking marching orders. You are creating a cult atmosphere. You are creating an atmosphere that doesn't allow things to be different from what you perceive as the norm. And I think that's unfortunately the case that pervades marketing tech. So I think if Dan had gone to work for another company that wasn't in the marketing tech space, I think it would be hard to write a book like this, because I think a lot of software as service companies, depending on the field they're in, probably don't have this sort of gung-ho cultish DNA that he describes in his book. I think the reason you have it in marketing tech is because marketing tech, you're still surrounded by a lot of clueless people who call themselves marketers or salespeople. And it's unfortunate, because these are the people that ultimately run those companies, or at least run specific departments within those companies. And the ones who are the leaders or the visionaries or the creatives, they're always castigated or pushed aside. Again, going back a couple episodes, we asked the question if creatives make good leaders. I actually think in this year, we're going to see some major change, or at least some major pivots at some companies, where I think some may realize, the analytical types we have make good organization leaders, and they're good operations managers, and they button things up and they keep the ship moving. But they don't do anything that actually moves the needle. And that's what's making things so ridiculous in the marketing world. You have 3,874 marketing tech companies. And honestly, out of all of those, maybe a handful I know of, because they have brand names or good products. Most of them, I have no idea what they do, and most of them don't do any marketing that really moves the needle. And this is the problem that we have in the marketing industry right now. We just have a lot of companies helmed or directed by a lot of people who probably think they're visionary, probably think they're risk takers, but they're the most conservative business people that you probably could ever meet. And it actually reminds me of a good conversation I had recently with a very close friend of mine, where we talked about how we think that some sectors of the business world are the most open and the most risk-taking and the most visionary. But when you really peel the layers back, they're none of that. And that's ultimately what I think the marketing tech world is. I think it's actually a very scared and frightened industry, led by a lot of people who really don't know what they're doing or don't know what people want from their products and services. Just running a lot of things into the ground, or thinking that they're running it in a way that they have been taught, hey, this is the way that you run a company. And again, experience in being an entrepreneur comes from actually doing it. So, I can't blame people for taking risks and not making all the right decisions. You're going to make 9 wrong decisions before you make a right one. I guess my point is, and why this book really resonated a lot with me, is it just shows how conformist the marketing tech landscape really is. It's actually good to see Dan, sort of stand up and say, wow, this has really become sort of a joke. And hopefully we can navigate away from that and actually become the creative economy that we are moving into as the 21st century rolls along. So just this past week, Facebook had their F8 Developers Conference, an annual event they host in San Francisco, which is one to watch because whatever they announce is going to reverberate throughout the tech industry. and some really interesting things that they announced. A big bet on live stream video, and we've seen this coming. We actually dedicated a podcast a few episodes ago around the subject of live stream video. Facebook's betting a lot in this area. They're actually going to put about $1 billion into research and development just on live stream video, which will be interesting to see what comes from it as it evolves. Another big thing that they are betting on is the world of bots, which is not a new world at all. In fact, we have seen bots exist since the advent of the internet. But now you are on a scalable platform with 1 billion users and the ability to use them in messaging services, which means they can be less intrusive to a mass audience and more intrusive to a singular audience, in the sense that if you're looking to message a company using Facebook Messenger, they have the ability to scale and use bots to have communication with you, at least to get an idea of what you're looking for. Another big area that they have put a lot of emphasis on is virtual reality. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg gave away some Oculus Rift headpieces and a Samsung phone to everyone who was in attendance, which I thought was quite interesting. But a big, big bet on these areas. And of course, the big conversation that they laid out was their 10-year roadmap, which I thought was really interesting, because while I'm excited that they're putting their leaps of faith into areas like connectivity, AI, VR, and AR, one of the problems I had with was how they presented that. And the way that they presented it was they basically are hedging almost all their bets that consumers are going to be along for the ride, or I should even say developers are going to be along for the ride in these particular areas, which they think will infiltrate heavily with consumers. And of course, I wrote a LinkedIn piece on this, and you can check it out. It's called "The 10-Year Plan: A Curse in a World of Customer Control?" And one of the things that I thought was interesting that I noted here is that how does a business map what it's going to be in the next 10 years without envisioning what could exist beyond what is known? I dislike 10-year plans in business because they are too linear and rigid in a world inhabited by imperfectionists, or I should say imperfections. I wonder if 10-year plans is the proper vision for a 21st century company in a customer-controlled world. As humans, we love to plan. It's part of our innate habit. There's even a whole book that I recommend you read by Charles Duhigg entitled The Power of Habit. The issue is that while humans have habits and we like to stay on course during many of the repetitive things that make us feel successful or safe, those habits, when aggregated into a large pool of people, don't always align into a perfect vision. It used to be said that 5-year plans were best left in the dustbin of history, since political systems that ultimately collapsed under their own bureaucratic weight and pressure were the only ones to use them. And so that's my point here, is Facebook is only a couple of years away from mottos like move fast and break things to now having 10-year plans. It almost makes me enjoy working for Microsoft, which used to be sort of burdened with the 5-year plan under the old Steve Ballmer regime. I find Microsoft now to be really more of the company that has adopted the move fast and break things motto. And that might be more out of necessity because the company's in a different area of business. But it's interesting how a younger company like Facebook has sort of flipped hats in that area. So moving beyond Facebook and the F8 Developers Conference, there's a behavior in business that marketers are going to have to pay attention to, because it may change the DNA of marketers as we've perceived them from the past couple of years, into entirely new thinking and activation models. And what I mean by this is growth hacking was a dominant form of marketing for many, many years since the term sort of came about. At least the first time I had heard of it back in 2011. Now you really are looking at sustainability as the new growth. So some businesses are actually saying, how do we not grow anymore, but how do we just sustain? So even if we have quarter over quarter of the same revenue, that's fine with them. That may not be fine with shareholders or investors, but that's fine with companies, especially if they're taking a lot of that money that they would be putting into profit and putting it into new ways that they can actually innovate at a more rapid rate, which is why they've moved more into a sustenance or a sustaining model. And what I mean here is I don't want to confuse people and let them think that I'm all for sustaining innovation. I'm always of the mindset that you need constant progressive innovation at a company. And many times this takes the form of disruptive innovation. But the interesting thing here is, because sustainability may be a new economic model with some businesses, it means that you're going to have to change the DNA of many of the marketers that exist within a lot of these ecosystems. And what that means is you're going to need a lot more marketers who have more of a sustaining mindset than a growth mindset. And the interesting thing here is, instead of using growth hacking techniques to scale or grow a business fast, I think what might be of interest to a lot of companies now is, once you've grown fast and you get to a point where you feel like you have a decent sized business, or at least a business where you feel like you can sustain at a particular level, sustaining techniques require a lot more ongoing relationship management. See, those aren't things that are talked a lot about in the growth hacking world. Ongoing relationship management that's a sustaining model. That's not how you grow quickly or how you scale quickly. So I think the interesting thing there is there may be sort of a move back to areas that have not really taken the front seat in the marketing world ever, at least as long as I've been involved in it, where you actually have community management become a thing again, and not in the traditional sense. I think, some people might be confused when I talk about community management. We're not talking about a person who is sitting on Facebook trying to build and engage with a community. We know that that's moved past its prime based on the fact on how the algorithm works on Facebook. What we're really looking at is, how do you have a person who actually can run a customer relationship management program? Because that is sustaining growth, because you're constantly talking to your customers and keeping them in your system so that they're continuing to do the word of mouth for you. That allows new customers to trickle in at moderate rates. So it'll be interesting to see if this is going to be a trend that picks up, or if it's something that a lot of people are talking about because there's no way to just grow things in perpetuity. And I recommend Douglas Rushkoff's new book, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, if you really want to realize that growing in perpetuity is just not possible in a lot of these businesses. We've even seen some companies growing at massive rates and still the shareholders punishing them because it's not big enough or it's not fast enough based on the valuations that a lot of these companies have, which are almost like ballooning valuations. Interesting trend. I wonder if it'll take off. Would love your feedback on it. Tweet to us at Disruptive FM on Twitter. And of course, participate in the conversation using hashtag Disruptive FM. That's it for episode 43. As I noted, I'll be in Orlando, Florida next week, so we'll be broadcasting live for episode 44. And also a hat tip to our sponsor, Amicom Books. Amicom Books is a division of the American Management Association and an independent book publisher that publishes books on business, self-help, and health. You can check out all their titles at amicombooks.org. That's amacombooks.org.
You've been listening to an episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Remember to subscribe to the show on iTunes. Purchase a copy of Geoffrey's latest book, Disruptive Marketing, on Kindle, hardcover and audio. Signing off from the city of Seattle. Press pause.